How often do you see a survey result pop up on the news or in your feed and just take it as fact? All the time, right? We kind of rely on them for, well, almost everything. And hey, for good reason. Surveys are the backbone of how we understand our world. Governments use them to build policy, companies use them to figure out what you're going to buy next, and scientists use them to understand us. They're a huge part of how we make sense of society. But what if the real problem isn't a bad sample size or a confusing question? What if the error is actually coming from inside our own heads in a way that's totally predictable, measurable, and honestly, kind of fascinating? So to get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at a statistical mystery that has been driving researchers crazy for decades. It's a puzzle so persistent, it forces us to completely rethink how we answer even the simplest questions. And here it is. For years, big surveys in the US, the UK, you name it, have all found the same bizarre thing. Heterosexual men report having way more lifetime sexual partners than heterosexual women do. Now, just stop and think about the math on that for a second. In a heterosexual population, the numbers have to add up, right? The averages should be identical, but they're not. They're not even close. We're talking men reporting 2 to 4 times as many. So what in the world is going on here? All right, let's do this like a detective story. First, we need to round up the usual suspects, the explanations that seem the most obvious. Okay, suspect number 1 is a simple sampling error. Maybe the surveys are just missing a small group of women with a really high number of partners, like sex workers, which could throw the whole average for men way off. Suspect number 2 is the one everyone jumps to, social pressure. The idea that men are bragging and women are being modest to fit in with social expectations. And that social pressure theory, it was taken very seriously. The famous geneticist Richard Lewontin basically said that if this data is this wrong, then, in his words, it puts all scientific sociology in deep trouble. So yeah, the stakes are pretty high. But here's the thing. While social pressure and sampling are definitely part of it, they don't explain the whole gap. Not even close. I mean, when people are asked about partners in just the last year, or about other sensitive topics, the answers for men and women are actually pretty consistent. So if people are just lying, why only about this one thing? The usual suspects, they just don't have a good alibi. So to really crack this case, we have to stop looking at the sociology and start looking at the psychology. We need to go inside the mind of the person actually answering the survey. And this is the question that changes everything. What if this isn't really about people lying? What if it's about people trying their best to answer a hard question, but using completely different mental tools to get there? What if this is really a story about memory? And believe it or not, there's a whole field dedicated to this stuff. It's called Cognitive Aspects of Survey Measurement, or CASM. And its whole job is to understand that answering a question isn't simple. It's an active, complex mental process. I mean, just think about what happens in your brain when someone asks you a question. It's a 4-stage journey. First, you have to understand what they're even asking. Then, you have to retrieve that information from your memory. After that, you have to judge or estimate a final answer, and only then do you actually report it. An error can sneak in anywhere, but for our puzzle, the real action is happening in stages 2 and 3, retrieval and judgment. So let's zoom in on that retrieval process. When a survey asks you how many times you've done something, how does your brain even begin to calculate that? Well, it turns out we tend to use one of 2 very different strategies. The first one is called enumeration. It's exactly what it sounds like. You mentally pull up a list of every single event, and you count them. 1, 2, 3. It's slow, it takes a lot of effort, and you have to have clear memories to pull from. And then you've got the total opposite, rough approximation. This is your guesstimate. You're not counting one by one. You're thinking something like, it was probably about 5 a year for a few years, plus a couple others. It's a fast, fuzzy, impression-based shortcut. Okay, get ready, because this is the absolute key to the whole mystery. Cognitive scientists have found that these 2 strategies aren't just different, they're flawed in completely predictable ways. They are systematically biased in opposite directions. So when people use enumeration, when they try to count every single instance, they almost always underestimate. And it makes sense, right? Your memory isn't perfect. It's really easy to just forget 1 or 2, especially from a long time ago. So your final count ends up being a little bit short of the real number. But, and this is so cool, When people use rough approximation, the opposite happens. They tend to overestimate. Guesstimating often relies on these little mental shortcuts, and we might accidentally anchor on a busy period of our lives and generalize from there, pushing our final number up, away from the real total. So now we have our clues. 2 memory strategies, 2 opposite biases. It's time to take this new evidence and apply it back to our original puzzle. And this right here is where it all clicks into place. When researchers started asking people how they came up with their number, a stunningly clear pattern emerged. As you can see, women were way more likely to say they used enumeration, that careful one-by-one counting. And men? They were far more likely to use rough approximation, guesstimating. So what does that actually sound like? Well, here's a real quote from someone using enumeration. They said they recalled who their partners were and literally counted them. You can hear how concrete and memory-driven that process is. And now for the complete contrast. Here's a quote from someone approximating, "It's a rough guess," and they even admit there's a margin of error. It's a totally different kind of mental calculation. So let's put the whole story together. Women are more likely to count, which is a strategy we know leads to underestimation. Men are more likely to guess, a strategy we know leads to overestimation. And when you have millions of people using these opposing, biased strategies, you get that huge, persistent gap we saw at the beginning. It's not just about lying. It's about the very mechanics of our memories. Now, this is way more than just a neat little statistical puzzle. The implications for how we should think about data in our everyday lives are absolutely massive. Just think about it for a second. When a survey asks how much you spent on groceries last month, or how many times you saw a doctor last year, are you counting or are you guessing? The strategy you use could be systematically skewing the results of surveys about health, the economy, politics, everything. The good news is, all this research gives us a roadmap for getting better data. We know what makes a good question. It's specific. It asks about the last 7 days instead of your lifetime. It uses simple, clear language. It's designed to make it as easy as possible for our flawed human memories to give an accurate answer. So the next time you see a poll, I want you to remember this story. The numbers you're looking at aren't just cold, hard facts. They are the end product of millions of complex human minds trying their best to remember. And maybe the most important question we can ask isn't just what did people say, it's how did they remember? Because asking that question, well, that changes everything.